Okay, so I'm going live here with the Bending Rules sort of weekly summary of different entrepreneurs I've interviewed on the podcast. And as you'll see, I've got shorts published and other things of that nature. Uh, but I also felt like being an entrepreneur for all these years and going through the various interview process, there's going to be things I'm going to take away from these discussions we might not have time to elaborate on. So one of the things I thought about going live is how can I summarize this for all you guys out there that are listening to my shorts, listen to the podcast, want to learn more about entrepreneurs and get sort of that professional take on it. Okay, so I'm going to go through two today. I'm usually going to keep these like 10 to 15 minutes, like pretty tight. If you have questions, great. I'll try to answer a few of those as we go through this. But with that, let's get started on the Bending Rules live summary. So one of the guests I had on was Bayard Fox. He had a company called Cement and Elegance. It was in the manufacturing industry. I'm not sure you had a chance to listen to that one. Even if you haven't, I mean, as you go back and kind of listen to these summaries, it might sort of get you back thinking about perhaps going back and listening to that pod and seeing if you can pick up something that could help you on your entrepreneurial journey. Okay, so there's a couple of things I really liked about the pod with Bayard. One was he talked about the role of fear in an entrepreneur. We elaborated on that quite a bit. And, actually it's okay and it's important to have fear. And that was one of his main drivers, was fear of failure and facing that failure. Now, incidentally, he had a pretty significant failure and it didn't stop him from kind of continuing to do what he did. And I think for any of those out there, you'll hear a common theme on this. I always ask people like, what was your biggest failure? What was your biggest challenge? Because I want them to be able to elaborate on those for you podcast listeners and channel listeners to understand that you're going to have failures along the way. And I know that's stating the obvious, but when you get in the game and you're really down and you're fighting hard, the degree of that failure may be small, it may be huge. And in Bayard's case, it was relatively big, which is why I'm spending some time on this. He had built this great company, had done this over the course of 10 years, and through a series of circumstances, that company had a significant failure and they got to 60 million in revenues, right? And so all this time, 10 years plus effort, time, money, all this, and it doesn't transpire. And, that in and of itself would set some people back indefinitely. But in Bayard's case, it did. And here goes the trait of resilience. And, we had a comment on the podcast. It was like it's like he got knocked down in the first round of a fight, but he got right back in there. And most people getting knocked out in the first round of the fight probably won't get up again. So it was just a great story in that context. The other thing that I really liked about the learning here is that the business he had before was on the retail side of sort of in the business in the construction industry. And in his second business, he switched to the manufacturing side. And his experiences taught him that, it might not necessarily scale as big as some of the things he was doing on the retail side, but he would be able to manage the risk and the margins are really good. And long or the short is through his perseverance and work ethic, he's built really successful business today. And the last thing I'll share about Bayard's podcast I really like is when I'll ask this question to you commonly is like, what trait do you think is important, the most important, or one of your top two or three traits that needs to be present in an entrepreneur? And he said confidence, which I thought was an interesting one. And we kind of rephrasing it a little bit as quiet confidence. And the more I thought about it, I thought that is absolutely true. I always, for all the businesses I started, I always believed in what I can do. So it was a combination of having confidence that you're the one that's being endowed with this journey and you can make it successful in conjunction with um, the belief that that's going to happen, right? And I think juxtapose that to that really over type of confidence that's almost like some have in it's magnetic sometimes, but also gives you a false. That kind of makes me queasy when someone is that confident in the outcome of their business because you know I, for one, know all the things that need to line up for any of this stuff to work. And I think it's misplaced confidence a lot of times. It actually makes me nervous as an investor participating in that companies. But on the other hand, if you didn't have that trait present, you know, and the belief present, it's going to be hard to get through a lot of the challenges along the way. Okay, so I'm going to summarize one more for you today. And that was my podcast interview with Kyle Morris. It was a real special one. This guy was he was in the Army Special Forces, and then later transitioned to an entrepreneur. So I really wanted to get a perspective on what does that type of person look like, in terms of their experience, and how do you make that transition. So I'm not going to obviously go through every detail of all these podcasts, just kind of key takeaways. One of the things I remember really resonated with me in my discussion with Kyle was we walked away and he said something to the extent of, well, the military, one of the things you're taught is at first contact, all plans change. And I thought that was just a great transition into the mindset of an entrepreneur. At first contact, all plans change. And so we come together with a plan. It's usually well thought out. We can defend aspects of it, and overcome objections to why this plan is going to work. And we gain the confidence of investors or just ourselves in general. And then it doesn't work. It doesn't transpire like you like. Well, he knew that was going to be the case right out of the gate. In fact, spent very little time planning, spent a lot more time on product and service, and customer satisfaction, delivery, and then later developed elaborate plans. So I like that. There's a lot I liked in this interview too with Kyle Morris. But the other thing, one of the things I really liked was towards the end of the conversation, we talked about core values and how that was integrated into his philosophy as a company. And he used this concept of core values is like your immunization from problems in the organization. And the fact that he couldn't even change the core values, that now there's 75 people or 100 people, he couldn't even change the core values of his business if he wanted to. Like, I mean, it was now part of the DNA. And I just thought that was really, really important for those of you building companies to think about those core values and how indicative that will be to success. But I liked his characterization of this as like your immune system, because I found the same thing. And the more that you apply those to your hires, to the way you deal with people and customers, and really believe in them, uh, then likely you'll be able to avoid some of those mistakes we've talked about, like with hiring and just decision making in general. So those were the big ones for those guys. There's a lot more subject there matter. Encourage you to get on there, listen to the pod itself, and that's going to be it from this weekly summarization of entrepreneurial interviews. And you'll have to wait till the next podcast, shorts, but we're putting them out at a really decent clip and have some exciting guests in the ensuing weeks. So thanks for supporting the channel, and we'll be back at you in the not too distant future.